Yeah.
5 minute podcast about mental health awareness. I'm Anu. This is Ryan. Now we're here to talk to you about neurodevelopmental/cognitive disorder, and these include cognitive issues in the brain where it's deficient or degrading.
We see this in Temple Grandin, who's a famous animal rights activist and also a person who worked on making humane ways to execute animals. She had autism, which caused her to be developmentally lacking in language arts, but we could see that she was obviously very gifted at math and science, which shows that people who are autistic are not necessarily developmentally lacking in all aspects.
Now, schizophrenia spectrum and psychotic disorders are marked by irrational ideas, distorted perceptions, and a loss of contact with reality.
We see this in Light Yagami in the anime Death Note. When near the end of the anime, when he is about to die, he becomes very paranoid and basically anything that happens, he thinks that it's someone trying to get him and it's going to end in his death.
And somatic disorders, the symptoms take a bodily form, like on the outside appearance, but there's no real physical cause.
We see this in the anime Naruto when the main character Naruto passes out with a heart attack, even though there were no physical stimuli and only mental trauma at the point when his friends were going to kill each other. And he was overwhelmed with stress to the point where something physical actually happens, even when there's no actual stimuli.
Now, moving on to personality disorders. These are disorders that are long-standing inflexible personality traits which impair one's functioning. And they're in three main clusters: eccentric odd behaviors, anxious fearful behavior, and dramatic impulsive behavior. Now, the symptoms of these disorders are of lower quality than other disorders, but they're impactful on one's life nonetheless.
A major example of this would be antisocial disorder from Ted Bundy, where we could see that although it didn't impact his day-to-day function, it did impact him majorly socially, where he was able to commit mass murder without feeling any remorse due to his lack of empathy.
Now, moving on to anxiety disorders, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's uncontrollable feelings of anxiety caused by something that impair your functioning.
We see specific phobias in trypophobia, which is a very common phobia within the American public. And this is basically a fear of small holes that are very close to each other. And most of the time, it's very not impactful, but sometimes in specific people, it's to the point where they can't function normally. Trauma and stress disorders are disorders that cause an intense, unpleasant, and dysfunctional reaction, often after an overwhelming or traumatic event.
All right, so PTSD is a stress disorder. In the anime Full Metal Alchemist, Eric is an alchemist who does forbidden alchemy, sacrificing his brother, his mom, and himself, like their bodies. And after this, he has multiple nightmares where he tries to overcome these experiences, right? He's every single day, like he wakes up sweating with these nightmares. Depressive disorders involve interpreting a stressful experience in a negative way, leading to a depressed mood, and then that affects your cognitive state and your behavior.
A major example of this is Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who is a famous actor and wrestler who developed major depressive disorder around age 18 when he saw his mother trying to commit suicide. This caused him to be unable to function in a day-to-day basis, and this caused him to get kicked off of his sports team and eventually caused him to be unable to do anything overall. But eventually he was able to get psychological help from a professional and became a whole new person and start his WWE career.
Bipolar disorders are basically where one is very depressed and low energy, and then that's accompanied by a period of time where they're really excited, full of energy, and then it continues in a cycle.
A major example of this would be Carrie Fisher, who everyone knows as Princess Leia, who had bipolar 2. This caused her to sometimes be very happy and laughing to the point where she couldn't get her lines out, and other times be extremely depressed to the point where she couldn't properly memorize her lines. And both of these things would obviously interfere with her day-to-day activities as an actor. Moving on, dissociative disorders are disorders in which the conscious awareness becomes separated or dissociated from previous memories, thoughts, and feelings.
Yeah, so in the a famous anime, Attack on Titan, Rainer has a mission to go into the other team's base, and during his time there, he becomes emotionally invested to the point where he has to create two personalities. One is where he remembers the mission and he kills these people, and then the other personality is where he sympathizes with the people and goes like against the mission. OCD disorders are basically compulsions and obsessions, basically reoccurring and persistent thoughts that lead you to take these repetitive behaviors.
An example of this would be Nami from One Piece, which is a famous anime, who has hoarding, which causes her to basically collect items that don't necessarily have value because she believes that they have some sort of value or will have some sort of value in the future. And this stems from her childhood where she had lots of trauma growing up very poor.
Disruptive disorders involve problems with self-control of emotions, which ultimately result in the violating of the rights of others.
We see this in the anime Naruto, where Sasuke, one of the main characters, has oppositional defiant disorder, which causes him to go against the directions and commands of his superiors, which are mainly adults, just for the sake of opposing those with authority, which often causes him to violate their rights and harm them.
Now, gender dysphoria disorders involve distress and a desire to like become the other gender and like changing your primary and secondary characteristics to match that.
We see this in the anime One Piece, where Bon Clay has gender dysphoria, and this causes he was born as a male, and this causes him to be extremely uncomfortable with his body, and eventually, as an adult, changing his body characteristics, such as how he dresses and how he talks and how he acts, to match that of the opposite gender, which is a female.
Now, eating disorders are severe disturbances in eating behaviors, or it's basically consumption of food that impairs your health.
We see this again in the anime Naruto, where Choji Akimichi has bulimia nervosa, which causes him to overeat a lot. And then because he sees himself as excessively fat, even though he isn't, he overexerts himself on a daily basis and exercises more than an amount that's healthy.